Today, we're investigating how technology is shaping the future of banking with Sankaet Pathak, founder and CEO of Synapse, a banking platform enabling companies to build and launch best-in-class financial products. Sankaet, welcome to the Fintech Files. Great to have you here.
Thanks, George. Thanks for having me.
Can I start by asking, your background and what made you launch the company?
Yeah, for sure. Actually, my background is in astrophysics and computer engineering. So by trade, I was going to become like an astrophysicist, probably a professor or something like that. Along the way, um, I kind of wasn't happy about the pace at which academia and kind of like astrophysics research was moving. So I didn't think that was kind of going to be my um, long-term area of growth because I've always had like a sense of urgency, and like I found people working on arguably very fascinating things, but same things for about a decade or more. So at that point, I knew that I didn't want to just be a professor in physics, but I didn't know what I actually wanted to do, and I started like playing around with just like internet technology in general. Um, and then about the same time, I was actually participating in a hackathon at my university, University of Memphis, and for taking inspirations for an app that I was building. I downloaded this app called Simple, which used to be BBVA's. Now I think BBVA is getting acquired by PNC. So Simple just shut down like last week. So that was like this interesting moment. Um, and I downloaded Simple. One of my other friends downloaded Simple. He was able to open up a Simple bank account in about 10 seconds, while I wasn't allowed to open one. So it was this like really stark realization and disparity between someone who was an immigrant, me, and then someone who was born and raised here. And when I asked Simple, it literally came down to because my social security had almost no credit on it, because I had never used credit cards. My parents hadn't built my credit score because they're not from here. Um, it just it just seemed like unless you were born in the US and already had a bank account that was operating for you, and your parents made the right decisions that they needed to because they were able to do so, then you had access to this uh, banking tech. Otherwise, you wouldn't. It's like kind of a club of a bunch of privileged people, and only you can get in. Um, at that point, I got very fascinated with this. I was like, well, there has to be an easier way to really pull this off. And I kind of asked around a little bit, did some research, kind of like thought through my own experience in banking, and it turned out from a consumer's perspective, it really seemed like why I couldn't be onboarded was because my social security was in their words thin filed. So they needed more proof of my existence in the US. So then I was like, yeah, but like in astrophysics, we do all this computer vision research. I can just like collect the proof online. Like I don't really have to go to a bank branch. So version one of Synapse was literally going to compete with Simple, except it was going to work for everybody. So it was going to work for an immigrant. It was going to work for people that were underbanked. It was going to work for people that were well banked. Everybody. Um, and the big differentiating factor was we would just collect any additional proof of identity that we needed on the app in itself, and then use rudimentary computer vision techniques to be able to verify the customer, which was their government ID and things like that. In some cases, proof of address, things like that online, so that they never had to go to a bank branch and just open up a bank account for them. Um, and I thought with that, we'll be able to kind of like solve this big problem. It turned out as I went about that path, initially we kind of built a closed loop fiat wallet where you could hold money, send money to your friends. In our case, we found a tremendous product market fit with restaurants in Memphis. That's where I was because it was bypassing the interchange network. Um, but there was no easy way to issue a card. There was no easy way to like issue an account and routing number on top of it. So I found myself stuck between having to build all of this backend infrastructure that hadn't been upgraded in like the last 20, 25 years at the minimum. And also kind of like building out the consumer facing aspects of this. And at that point, I realized if I truly want to ensure that everyone has access to high class financial products, then the path to that isn't really competing with simple. The path to that is really upgrading the infrastructure. And if you can do that, then through my getting to know the community more, I realized that like there was a lot of will in developers to be able to build out the best financial experiences for customers, but there wasn't a lot of the ways. So I was like, let's just build the way. Let's just build the infrastructure, and developers will come and build products on top of it. So that's how I got into it. And then we pivoted from what I thought as a consumer was the problem to understanding the problem a little more in detail as I became a part of the industry. And then started focusing on the infrastructure side versus the user experience side.
I love this story, and I love how your background as an immigrant has transformed into, the founding story of the company, and and how now you can give access, but not directly, indirectly. So can you tell us a bit more? So I see on your website you offer many products, payments, loans, cards. Who are the typical customers that use your services?
Yeah, the website's a little dated, so we'll probably
All
push an
right.
update to that. Here's a good way to think of it, right? Like at the core of it, Synapse provides two products. One has been an existing product for a while. The second product we're starting to like ramp up. So the first product is what we call a deposit hub. So a deposit hub is create a deposit account with about 2 or 3 API calls, right? So pretty quick and easy. You can do it in seconds. And we kind of like I kind of half jokingly compare that to Amazon's EC2 product line. It's like your core product, right? So you essentially allow developers to be able to spin up a deposit account, an account that can hold money in like seconds, just like how Amazon allows you to be able to spin up a server in about a second or two. Um, and then we have tons of features around it to really make this deposit account easy to interface with, right? Like if you can put people's money into an account, then the only thing you have to really worry about is how do they access that money, right? Like how do they put more money in it, and how do they withdraw money out of it? So then all the stuff, ACH, card issuance, account routing number issuance, check issuance, bill pay, what have you, interest accrual, even all of these are just features surrounding this deposit hub is what we call it. So that's our one core product. And then our second core product that we're starting to ramp up is Deposit Hub really democratizes access to the deposit infrastructure for everybody. Doesn't matter if you're an immigrant, doesn't matter if you're a new company or an old company, doesn't matter if you're well banked, doesn't matter if you're underbanked. We can open up a deposit account for you in a couple of seconds and then issue an account number on top of it so that you can do direct deposit or connect it to Venmo or PayPal, what have you. And also issue you a card number so that you can essentially use this in stores or anywhere you go. So Deposit Hub really democratizes access to the deposit infrastructure in banking. Credit Hub, on the other hand, really unlocks the next big thing for us, which is one big reason why I was not a part of the financial ecosystem, or I wasn't a part of this elite club, is because I didn't have credit history built. So we don't just want people to be able to interface with financial technology on the modern rails. We also want people to be able to interface with this on traditional rails. So what
Mm.
Credit Hub really does is it essentially allows us to open up a credit account for immigrants, underbanked people, large companies, small companies, well-banked people. It doesn't matter. Then it can help you build your credit, and it can also give you a credit card so that you get cashback rewards. In case of fintech companies, you get higher interchange rates, what have you. And the big secret plan, if you may, in this is let's bring everyone who has been left behind by the financial system into the mainstream financial system. That could mean fintechs, that could mean traditional banks, that could mean other lenders. It doesn't matter. But we want to be able to make sure that everyone has equal representation. So what Credit Hub really does is allows developers to be able to spin up credit accounts in seconds for any of these profile of people, and then either build credit for them or give them cashback rewards or make a high interchange rate themselves. But at the core of it, we just want it to be so easy that people's credit gets reported to the credit bureaus and nobody is thin filed anymore. So that is kind of like our second product. And then everything else, payments, checks, all these different things are just features surrounding these two hubs, right? So the deposit hub and the credit hub.
Understood. So you've got this, let's say, building blocks of banking, and really you can build the whole of banking services with credit and
Totally.
deposits. And
Yeah.
how does it look now from the perspective of the clients of Synapse? Can you tell us how they access it, how they can interact with it?
Yeah. So in simple terms, with our API, right? So we essentially provide people an API that they can use to be able to create these accounts, access these accounts, make changes to these accounts. And then along with our API, we also give them give them access to a dashboard, so that if they don't want to use the APIs in some cases, because some functionality is just like not core to their product, right? Like shipping a new card, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Then they can just use our dashboard to be able to do just that, right? So those are kind of the two tools our customers use, which is a stark, it's a big departure from how it's been done in fintech for a long time. Like you essentially have to surround yourself with 5 or 6 different tools, and then interface with all of them and build integrations with them. Synapse, on the other hand, is just a one-stop shop. If you want to open up a deposit hub or a credit hub, you just come to us and you just get access. You just have everything baked in to be able to pull that off.
Understood. And so, can you give us some examples? Maybe, I don't know if you can talk about actual clients or what they're doing with it in real life.
Yeah, totally. So one of our customers, Mercury, essentially builds business banking products, right? So they took our deposit hub product and then built a really good business banking business on top of it. So they make it very easy for startups to be able to open up bank accounts, like deposit money in it, just truly operate a business banking account. One of the most interesting things when someone like Mercury started versus other people who've tried to do before is most of the startup founders in the Y Combinator or the Bay Area are immigrants. And before Mercury, there was another company that their name escapes me, that essentially tried to do the same thing that Mercury was doing. But they were built on what I would call the legacy stack, the same stack that Simple was built on. It was actually ex-Simple people who essentially built the business banking product. The biggest hurdle they ran into is they could not onboard immigrants. So they could not onboard businesses started by immigrants. While because Synapse had already considered that, Mercury was able to do it, right? So it's like these things that you usually don't consider when you're building a product.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a long-winded way of saying, again, they do business banking. They essentially use our deposit hub product to be able to open up deposit accounts. And one thing that really benefited them was that we had already accounted for the fact that, hey, there are going to be immigrant founders or immigrants in general who would want access to banking. And that did not get in the way of their growth. While if the same thing would have tried to be done on Bank, which is what Simple was built on, or the next company who was trying to do the business banking product that I forget the name of, they were built on, then they wouldn't have been able to kind of like truly unlock their potential because they wouldn't have been able to kind of like onboard immigrant founders. Another company that's like quite interesting to me is Quo. Quo is at this point, I think, a Series A company. And what they really provide is they essentially use a credit hub product to provide spend cards to consumers. So if you want a line of credit to be able to pay your bills online, they will essentially give you a line of credit through Synapse, and then also give you a card to be able to spend. So that one's really interesting for us. Then Cleo does something about the same. Cleo is a European company also. They also exist in the US. Again, using a credit hub infrastructure to be able to do cash advances to customers. So yeah, these are like some of the examples of people that are using essentially kind of like a deposit or a credit hub to be able to kind of like build out what I would consider some really unique financial products that work quite well for everybody at this point.
Understood, yeah, because then people, I'm vaguely familiar with Cleo, but I think they have it's also about a more intelligent, artificial intelligence approach to money management, etc.,
Yeah,
which is what you can then build once you've, well, first, in order to build that, you need to have cleared the infrastructure and be able to
totally.
do the deposit, right? So I guess
Yeah, like
that's,
the most fascinating thing about technology is there there are about two big waves that you usually see. So the first one is about enablement. Can you truly like even provide a product to people? And then the second one is about intelligence. Um, and like I'm just super excited that like more and more people are going to spend time on intelligence, because like enablement is becoming like it's kind of getting to a place where it's a solved problem. um, so yeah, I love that about Cleo. Like I think that's where the future is. Money should just work for people, and I think their kind of like financial advice is essentially playing a good role in that, which is just adding the intelligence component into financial services as well.
wonderful. So yeah, so just to recap, so if what's you mentioned a lot of examples of immigrants, but it's quite funny. Yeah, if I was to go to the U.S., well, I could visa aside, I could do a lot of things. I could bring my money as well and
Totally,
exchange it. I could have my dollars, etc. But
totally.
none of my history and whatever, no matter how much what I've done in London and in Europe, would actually count to nothing, right? And it's not something. It feels like you mentioned, it should be just work for people, and it should be, well, seen from that perspective, it seems ludicrous that it's not transportable. But until now, this is how it was.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think doesn't matter if you've had access to financial services in the past anywhere or not. You should be able to access it now. Like that's how it really needs to be by default.
And earlier on, so I also want to, you mentioned access and intelligence. You were mentioning something about how Synapse has perhaps, or this kind of service have perhaps a similar role with financial services to what Google has with information in general. Could you please go through this with
Well,
us?
yeah. So here's a good way to think about it, right? And the funny thing is, the impacts of something like Google, we're still understanding, right? So we're still in the process of really understanding. Okay, what happens to education when information is just freely available for you online, and all you have to do is just search for it. Um, so for the longest time, by and large, to be able to get information, you had to travel to libraries, right? So you had to go to these locations that had kind of like accumulated some some amount of informational wealth, and you had to go there to be able to access it. Um, and like with anything, as the barrier to entry is even a little bit higher, like disparities are quite evident and they emerge. So, for instance, if you weren't born near Boston, you could never go to Harvard if you were born in a completely different country and didn't have the resources and the means to be able to get there. So you would never this like you're perpetually in a worse place than someone who's born in a more privileged environment. Same happens with banking. Like if you don't have a monthly income, you usually get charged by banks a monthly fee. So essentially, that costs you more to have a bank account. It turns out for the longest time, if you weren't close to a banking branch, You couldn't really run and operate a bank account. For instance, even for someone like me, when I came to the US, there was no Uber and Lyft. I didn't have a car. I was too shy to ask my friends to give me a ride. I walked about 3 miles to be able to go to a bank branch for Bank of America and open up a bank account. And then that just gave me access to checking accounts. It didn't even give me access to savings, credit card, what have you. So yeah, like essentially, fintech or banking or financial services is going through this transformation that information went through with moving away from kind of like the libraries of the world to kind of something like Google. And today, banking in the most traditional sense is where information was in libraries. You have to go to these clusters to be able to kind of like access this. And what internet's really enabling is truly democratizing it. Let's just distribute it across the internet to everybody, so that everyone has access to this. So I think like that's kind of a similarity between this. And I truly believe the impact of this, we would still be studying 20 years from now, right? Like some of these things take a long time to unfold from a social fabric perspective. So the most interesting question is what happens when everyone has access to safe and affordable financial services? And we don't know all the impacts just yet.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think it's very exciting about finance, fintech. That's what makes so interesting to think of and to build products on at the moment. So you really summarized very well. What I would like to do as well before we finish is look a little bit from Synapse perspective, because it's wonderful that you can now give access to deposits and credit in a simple way. But what did you have to build to get there? So how does it work behind the scene in terms of tech, but also I guess there's compliance, infrastructure? Can you tell us a little bit, because I guess there's a lot about that?
Yeah, totally. Like in simple terms, there are about three aspects that we had to give access to, right? So the first one is Synapse had to really build out a core. A core is what holds your balances, what holds information about customers, what really allows you to interface with the banking system, right? So we had to build a core. Then second, we had to build out a payment stack. So payment stack is issuing cards, processing bank-to-bank transfers, issuing checks. Someone gives us a picture of a check, processing that. So we really had to build out the payment stack. Then the third piece we really had to build out is what I talked about at the beginning, which is government ID verification, kind of like making sure that you can identify people who don't have credit history. So what I call that is a risk stack, right? So being able to kind of like pull off a risk stack. So pretty much Synapse is core plus payments plus risk, right? So we have to actually build all of that out to be able to, in simple terms, pull this off, right? And then do this on top of legacy banks, banks that have not really used modern technology for about 30 years. Not to their fault, modern technology just didn't exist in banking for a long time. And then give developers access to kind of like this whole infrastructure as with an API versus with a UI or something like that. So by and large, that's what we had to do on the software side: build out a core, payment stack, and a risk stack.
I understand, and I kind of only can imagine the complexity of it. Just talking about how the risk stack is a particular component of finance, right? It's very different if you were in any other industry, and how it's evolving itself. So I can imagine a lot of work behind the scene. But let's talk a little bit more about the partners as well, because obviously this is built upon partnerships with banks. So how does this look like, and what are the benefits for the banks?
Yeah. So on the partnership side, kind of like the bank serves as the overseer of all of this, right? Because like they are the regulated entity. Well, at least they have been so far. Synapse is now regulated on some fronts. But we'll just talk about traditionally. Traditionally, banks have essentially kind of like played a supervisory role because we're essentially plugging into their charter to be able to provide these solutions and give us access to the payment rails. In the US, you can only get access to the payment rails through a bank. Um, so those two are the key roles that a bank plays in a partnership like this. Um, the benefits for the bank are few. One, increase in payment revenue. Two, increase in deposit revenue. This is the cheapest way to acquire deposits because you don't have to market, you don't have to solicit customers yourself. And third, which is uh, um, quite crucial in the US for any small bank, is the interchange revenue. So when people use their cards, you make revenue off that. So those essentially are the three key reasons why a bank gets into it. And those are three different facets with which they make revenue. And for banks, we've worked with the banks that even we haven't worked with, but have just been in the industry. This is the highest growth engine, right? Like it's better than trying to get small businesses or someone onboarded onto a legacy software. You have to do very little services work yourself. And the access is like the overall revenue opportunity is like quite high. So
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense, and it's an interesting point because the press, or we love talking about neobanks versus incumbents, and how it's going to be a big fight. But really, what you paint is a very different picture, which is probably, it gives you a perspective on how the future of banking could evolve, and how, well,
totally.
it's a collaboration, and some banks who participate in this actually could really be big winners as well. Um, let's move on to one of the final question about, to what extent this is really about every company becoming a fintech, every company being able to offer financial services. As we now, we've so far have talked a lot about fintechs, or company whose product is very much financial. How do you think this can be extended to some non-financial companies? And I think we see a lot of moves. I've noticed Uber is offering some financial services. Walmart is buying or getting into fintech. But how do you see this, evolving?
Yeah, I think the big ones you're already aware of, right? So to me, the most interesting ones are the silent ones, not so big ones. So we have a customer called Groundwork, for instance. What they provide at the core of everything is a money management or a accounting management tool initially. Now it's a money management tool, but it used to just be like an accounting and logistics management tool for football leagues. So if you had
Wow.
a football league, your kids were playing in it, all these different things, you just need a software to be able to manage all the logistics of what's going to happen. Um, their need evolved quite organically. Initially, parents asked for, can we just pay our dues with this? So they just added basic payment processing at the beginning. Then the treasurer started asking for, hey, we have expenses. Can we just buy stuff with it? Because we collect our money with this, and then we have to disperse this in a bank account. We have to go and find a bank account for a soccer league. And then from there, we have to use it. So from there, they came to Synapse. They started issuing cards, issuing checks, all these different things. So this isn't. It doesn't seem like a bank account, but at the core of it, it is. Like it's pretty much a bank account at this point for soccer leagues. But that's not the core problem they were trying to solve. They're just trying to make it easier for the soccer leagues to be able to really manage their logistics and pull off kind of like the true experience, which is like enjoying soccer. And it turned out one component that could really help get a lot of the heavy lifting around management of the soccer leagues out of the way was if you embed a bank account in this application itself. So yeah, Uber's doing it, Apple's doing it, but in my mind, the most interesting ones are these applications that are serving some really good organic need. And it turns out, like if you just put some components of financial services in it, the overall experience enhances tremendously. So they end up being like they end up being a really fascinating example for me. So that's how I see like this evolving. I think over time, just like how we didn't even know what were all the different ways a PC could really change and improve lives from a work perspective. we think same is going to happen with financial services, like embedding financial services into a lot of these kind of like productivity apps, if you may, also makes it much easier and kind of like enhances your experience of usage overall.
Yeah, that's where I find it so exciting for probably any founder now, any company, and not just finance and fintech. Is, oh, could I now think? Should think about how I can include something related to financial services, not because I want to become a bank, but because I want to improve my core service, which is football, whatever. I can imagine a little video production company like mine. Bringing stuff to its anyway, many freelancers, many participants throughout the process, etc. And that's a very exciting perspective, I think.
Yeah, no, totally. I think this is what I advise people usually. I'm like, think how you can improve the experience for your customer, and if it turns out a financial product is a way to do it, then you should explore it versus not.
And that would be my last question on this. How much education do you think is needed? Because, for example, this football league company, obviously their core expertise is not that. So it was a demand from the client. But do you think founders are enough aware of this opportunity and know enough about it?
I think people are getting around to knowing about it. So here's what I'd say, right? Like 2 years ago, if you wanted to do something in financial services, you had to have a lot of expertise. Now you have to have low to moderate expertise. In next 12 to 24 months, you're probably going to have low expertise or no expertise. So we're moving in the right direction, but I'd be lying if I say like the world is all the way there. People have to still know a little bit about regulations. They still really have to understand a little bit about the intricacies of financial services, but not as much. Like 80% of it is gone, but the 20% that's remaining is quite hard to solve because a lot of it is around like fraud, right? So how do you kind of like manage fraud? But I think over the course of the next year and a half, I think we as a collective in the industry, we will get there. So I think people are aware of the opportunity, especially with Apple and Uber and all these people launching some of these really interesting proof points. They're aware of it. It still requires about low to moderate understanding or a knowledge of the risks associated with offering financial products to be able to pull it off. Our personal mission and goal is let's get to a point where you have to understand none of it and it still just works for you. So all you have to think about is enablement, not also think about the risk it brings to you. I think we'll probably get there in the next 12 to 18 months. And at that point, that would be, in our mind, the most powerful combination. Everyone at this point understands that financial services can really improve the experience, and then they won't have to also factor in risk that comes with it. So that's what we're looking forward to.
Really something to look forward to, and I think that's a wonderful conclusion. Thank you so much, Sankaet.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me.
Thanks for listening, and thank you to our guests who make this possible. Subscribe to never miss an episode. As this is a new broadcast, if you could give us a 5-star review on iTunes and your favorite podcast player, that would be great. Let's work together to accelerate fintech towards the 2030s.